And with that, welcome you inside this week-ending edition of Big Ten Today, presented by Gatorade. Rick Pizzo, Jerry DiNardo, Coach Dave Wanstead alongside. Guys, I'm curious. At this point in the year, we're nearly at the halfway pole. Hard to believe. We'll get there next weekend. Does it go faster or slower sitting in these chairs compared to when you were actually coaching the game?
Wow, that's a great question. Hadn't thought about that one. I'd say it goes faster as a coach.
Yeah, particularly if you're having a good year.
Yeah. Right. A little bit less stress, though, when you're on this side of the desk as opposed to walking the sideline. So as I mentioned,
Rick, let me just say, we became experts when we quit coaching, okay? We're geniuses, okay?
Because you can always question what everybody else does. I would have never, ever possibly done that. Next weekend is week 7. That's the halfway point. But this weekend, week 6, as we look at the big board, and it actually gets started on Friday night with Michigan State, Oregon. We have a triple header here for you on the Big Ten Network. We have Purdue, Wisconsin to start, unbeaten Indiana and Northwestern in the middle window, USC, Minnesota late at night. We'll dive into all of those games coming up in a little bit. But we're going to start chronologically. We start with Friday night. It's Michigan State. It's Oregon. It's under the lights for the Ducks. And it's an Oregon offense, Jerry, that I would say first couple of weeks of the season was a little bit underperforming, maybe trying to find its footing. I understand they haven't played the toughest competition defensively the last couple of weeks, but they look more like, I think, the Oregon offense that we expected at the start of the year.
Yeah, and I think it was more mental than it was physical. I just think, the off-season, everybody's promoting them. They were going to be one of the best teams. They're joining a new conference. I mean, I think there were a lot of distractions for that team. I went out and saw them, as you know, on the bus tour. They're really, really talented. So I think they were in a little bit of a funk early, and it may have been more mental than anything.
Yeah, and even though Gabriel Dillon is a new quarterback, has experience, he's still new in the system. And I think as he grows, obviously, we're seeing the big plays now. I mean, if you just looked at the last couple of weeks and the plus 20 passes, plus 30, plus 40 runs and passes, wow, you say, this is Oregon. This is who they are. And that offensive line, you remember when we talked after the first week, how disappointed we were?
Really not just the first week, the first 2 weeks. Really, that offensive line really didn't look good.
Giving up sacks and stuff. I mean, it seems like, hey, no sacks last week. UCLA, 0 sacks against Oregon.
If they didn't have those 2 touchdowns on special teams, they would have lost that game the second week of the season, I think. Interesting coaching matchup. I think anytime Joe Rossi's running your defense, you've got a chance. I mean, I just think he's one of the best in the business. And obviously, Jonathan Smith knows this program. So there's some interesting things with the coaching matchups as well.
Absolutely. And the one thing I'm sure that Jonathan Smith is telling them, guys, every opportunity we get, would they drop an interception for a touchdown last week? Any time, we got to eliminate the penalties and turnovers. But if Oregon does give us a chance somehow, interception, sack, fumble, balls on the ground, well, we got to take it.
I mean, Michigan State's wondering what if that Boston College game, they dropped a touchdown pass before BC goes down. Otherwise, you go on the road and win that game despite a bunch of turnovers from Aiden Childs. And we talk so much about the Oregon offense, Dave, that sometimes that defense gets forgotten about. This is a defense that has watched all the tape on Childs, and they're thinking, we can turn this guy over, especially inside our own stadium.
Yeah, and that's where Dan Lenning is an ex-defensive coordinator. We all know that. He's got his thumb on that defense. So as far as any run-pass option, Jonathan Smith, that he'll run a little bit of that with the quarterback, they're not going to be fooled by anything. And they haven't given up the big pass plays. Michigan State's had 2 or 3 big pass plays early, right? I think they've had 3 plus. Oregon is going to be different with the pressure and obviously coverage because of the athletes they have. These guys got players.
Yeah, and I don't know if this goes on every day, but when I was there for practice, Dan Lanning spent most of his time with the defense, much like Nick Saban did at Alabama.
Sure.
And Dan worked with him. He got over to the offense some, but you could tell he was more involved. Not that he was coordinating it, but he was just kind of coaching a lot of different positions, more on the defensive side than the offensive side.
How about the stretch for Michigan State out of the frying pan into the fire, right? You get Ohio State and Oregon on back-to-back weeks. I know there's nothing Jonathan Smith could do about the schedule, but it certainly impacts the way that your team feels about itself after a couple of games like this in back-to-back weeks.
And think about the Maryland game. I mean, that was a big win.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a big win then. Now, as you look at their schedule, that's a huge win. I mean, Maryland's struggling, and Michigan State got off to a fast start.
Got to run the ball. Got to keep the football away from Oregon somehow, some way.
If this game gets in the 40s, I think you have no chance.
You got to slow it down somehow and not stub your toe when you're in the process of doing it.
Michigan State's not an up-tempo team. They're a pro-formation team. And again, Joe Rossi and is it Brian Lindgren, running the offense. It's a good coaching matchup. Oregon's the more talented team, but I'd say the coaching matchups are.
Yeah, I like this Michigan State staff. I think Michigan State staff has a really, really good feel for what they want to do. They may not get there in year one because of the league they're playing in right now, because of the roster that they have, and because of the schedule that they have. There's a lot of faith that Jonathan Smith will get things turned back around and get Michigan State back to where it was a few years ago. It is the Friday night game coming up on Fox tonight, Michigan State and Oregon. An unbeaten in Ohio State, not just unbeaten, they've been completely untested to this point. They have not played the toughest schedule in the world. We know how talented this team is. Chip Kelly has seen the impact immediately. Offensively, we know defensively they're one of the best in the country. But since they haven't played anybody, Jerry, I know that you think this schedule and how this game sets up for Ohio State against a solid Iowa team that can run the football and is fundamentally sound, it's kind of a nice way and a nice time in the year for Ohio State to play this game.
It's the first time in recent history that we had to wait this long. You talk about next week being halfway through the season. By this time, ordinarily, Ohio State's played a good non-conference game.
They have Oregon next week, by the way.
And that sets up pretty well. Iowa's a good team, Oregon's a better team, and as they get ready. But you look at what Chip Kelly has done offensively. I mean, they are so hard to defend between the option, the pocket pass, the play action. I mean, there is multiple and as diverse as any offense in the country. And then you have Phil Parker, who had last week off. And not that Phil's going to put a lot of new stuff in. He doesn't put a lot of new stuff in. What Phil Parker will do in those 2 weeks is he will teach his guys on the right hash, on their 21-yard line in this formation, they only run 3 plays. That's the genius of Phil Parker. You give him an extra week.
That's fascinating.
Those are the adjustments he makes. It's not, hey, let's bring another blitz or let's change it. Let's surprise them with a 3-man front. He teaches them what they're going to run down to 3 plays.
You mentioned Chip Kelly. The one point that I didn't realize. Last year they were in the shotgun, non-huddle, like 25% of the times. This year, 80% of the time, they're huddling up. No huddle compared to huddling up. And I think that's a credit to Chip from the standpoint that he can see things. You know what I mean? He can see things up there and he can talk to that quarterback rather than let's not go too fast. And he was known for that. So just the tempo of Ohio State's offense is different than what it's been with Chip running the thing. And, you're talking about Iowa. Iowa's defense, I got to say this, and I love Phil Parker, and they're going to be outstanding as always. But when that season started, they were giving up some big pass plays.
Unusual.
Right,
yes.
unusual.
Yep.
And I was saying to myself, this is not the Iowa that we're used to seeing. Now, they have tightened it up, and they've improved. And like you said, he's going to have prepared for this with a week off. But this is a Kurt Ferentz type game, from the standpoint of, even when they didn't, the offensive line is 100% better, in my opinion, this year than it's been. And the running back, God, I mean, they can.
Caleb Johnson's one of the best in the country, flat out.
So they can legitimately run the ball and hold the football. This will be a big test for Ohio State.
Phil coaches better when he's in a bad mood, so this will help.
Watching that Ohio State tape will help.
I'm curious, though, if you're Phil Parker defensively and you have to take one thing away, I think you take away the run. As talented as Ohio State is on the outside, and Will Howard has shown what he can do, and Chip Kelly, yes, he can dial up some funky stuff in the pass game. I still think you have to focus on taking away Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins and taking your chances on the outside.
Absolutely.
I just think that has to be goal and priority number one.
And you do have a new quarterback. Will Howard now, it's not like he's been in this system for 3 years. So that even would tell me definitely stop the run. Let's see what this kid can do.
Now, understand this. If it's an RPO, you don't care if they stop the run because you're going to throw the ball. And for them, for them not to give the ball on an RPO means that they've committed too many people on defense, and now he throws the ball.
I do want to go back to Caleb Johnson. You brought up that point. This Ohio State defense, so talented. You have almost 10 guys, really, that could have gone to the NFL draft last year that decided to come back. You had Caleb Downs. There's no question they're really talented. So you deal with the best player that you've dealt with, and Johnson's coming off a massive game against Minnesota. So defensively, Jim Knowles is looking at this running back scenario, Dave, and he's thinking his defense has to do what to make Iowa one-dimensional?
Play as many guys as you have to at the line of scrimmage.
Just jam him in the box?
And make McNamara throw it. Make the quarterback throw it. Obviously, we know his numbers have not been very good. They've been bad since they started playing Power 5 teams, Iowa. So they are, in my mind, one-dimensional right now. Iowa would have to prove to me that they are a balanced offense. Right now, they're not. Now, they're a lot better running the ball than they have been the last 2 or 3 years. Combination of line and running back like we're talking. But as far as passing, it's been a disappointment since they've started into the Power 5 teams with the quarterback and throwing the ball, in my mind. And they're going to have to do that to some extent.
I think you're going to have to be gap disciplined. I mean, that's where this kind of running gets you. I mean, you void a gap and they jump cut. It doesn't take them long to get by. And so you've got to have good pursuit angles, and I think you've got to be really gap disciplined against an Iowa run game.
2.2, help me out here. Tim Lester.
First-year OC Tim Lester.
So he's always got something that he's done somewhere. You know how
they're going to earn his money in this one.
Yeah, he'll earn his money, but there's also, you're sitting there, Jim Knowles on defense at Ohio State, and you'd like to think that, hey, I faced this guy for the last 3 years. We know what he likes to do in certain situations like you're talking about, but he'll have something different for him, which will be new. Now, can they execute it?
Well, that's the big question, because Jim Knowles and that Ohio State defensive staff is not threatened by the Iowa wide receivers. They're happy to put those corners, even maybe a safety, on an island with the wide receivers and say, we're going to put 7, 8 guys. And unless Caleb Johnson can beat us through 7 and 8, then you're not going to beat us. It's Iowa and Ohio State Saturday afternoon inside the shoe. Rick Pizzo back with Jerry DiNardo and Dave Wanstead here on this edition of Big Ten Today. Let's head to the Twin Cities. It's Lincoln Riley's USC team coming to the Twin Cities for the first time to face Minnesota as a Big Ten Conference member. And Dave, this is strength on strength because we know about Lincoln Riley's offensive acumen. We know Miller Moss can throw it. USC's wide receiver room is loaded. But did you know that Minnesota statistically has the top-ranked pass defense in FBS football so far this season?
No, I did not. Thank you, Rick.
You're welcome.
I'll make a point off of that.
You think you would have told us at the meeting before the show? He's keeping that.
You can't share all the secrets in the green room.
I just hope those guys that got the #1 pass defense, which I hope they can run as fast, because I think USC has as good a receivers as anybody in the country. I mean, those guys, was it Kobe Lane and company? I mean, these guys make catches that are NFL-style catches. So, yeah, they're going to need that #1 rated pass defense. That would be a good place to start. But you know what? USC, they started so slow. And me having coached there, these kids, it bothered me a little bit. After the game, they're behind at halftime, and they come back and win it. And one of the interview things was, well, they were a lot tougher than we expected. That they still think they got Marcus Allen. I don't know what they're thinking at USC, but there's a perception amongst the team that, which is good. You want your team to think that you're a championship team. That's why you go to some of these places. But to start off like they did, and turn the ball over like they did, I mean, that you're not going to recover from that most weeks. And they fought back, and they did a great job, great halftime adjustments. But that disappointed me. The one thing that I'll close on USC, and I said this against Michigan, that offensive line, they had a freshman, a sophomore, a junior, and 2 seniors. They're young, they're inexperienced, and that, to me, is the one issue at USC's team right now that concerns me week in and week out.
You don't see the chemistry yet.
I don't see it, and I don't see the domination that you'd expect to see from a USC offensive line.
I didn't know that that's what the players said after the game, because one of the things I wanted to discuss today is USC going to Minnesota. I mean, the mindset of the USC players, to me, I'd love to know what it is. I'm guessing it's not overly positive about the history of Minnesota football. What they don't know is that team, Minnesota, plays as hard is any team.
And fundamentally solid.
One thing PJ does, I mean, he does a lot of good things. They play hard. And if they had that attitude about Wisconsin, they better change their attitude going into Minneapolis, because USC is a national brand name, right? Minnesota really isn't in football, and especially from the players that have come from the West Coast. So I think there's a mental hurdle there that if USC thinks they're just going to show up and win, they're going to get out tough, and they could.
Well, and this is a game. Let's be honest. It's a game that USC can't afford to lose.
Right.
At this point in the season, with the loss already to Michigan, and I'm not just talking about the playoff inclusion. I'm talking about what it means for the rest of the year. I understand what you're saying, that maybe you don't get as fired up as you do for other games, but that's where it's on the coaching staff to make sure that you're ready to play this game on Saturday night.
And there's also a run game element to this. I mean, they ran for USC ran 93 yards against LSU and 126 against Michigan. And the reason I picked those two games, obviously, those are the two best opponents. If you look at the other stats, they may have run for more yards. But if USC doesn't keep the run game in this game, even though they're the more talented team, they can throw the ball. But I'm going to tell you, you better be careful going into Minneapolis.
I agree. You don't want to take USC doesn't want to take this thing down into the fourth quarter, is what we're saying. But I tell you, the one thing, Lincoln Riley's smart. He knows what he's doing. He knows his team. He knows the pulse. All he's got to do is put that Michigan tape on. Right? They're down to Michigan, and they fight back, and it's a debatable onside kick at the end of the game with Minnesota. Yeah. If they recover the kick, they might tie the game up. So the way Minnesota came back, at least he's got film against a team that beat them to watch and say, hey, what, you think?
USC also has to play 4 quarters, guys. They played 4 quarters against LSU. They played 2 against Michigan. They played 2 against Wisconsin. You got to put 60 minutes on the field when you're on the road in conference play. Time for the big stats. It is a rematch of the national title game, but both these teams, Jerry, are so different, especially Washington. I mean, it's a completely different program than it was a year ago.
2 new staffs, right? I mean, Harbaugh's gone. Yeah. Kalen DeBoer's gone. This game, to me, is a great matchup for Washington. I mean, just the way Washington is playing. They're explosive on offense. I go back to Jed Fish as a tremendous play caller. He'll keep your defense off balance constantly. And you watch them on defense, they can run, and they are pressure. So you try to defend the option that Michigan's going to run against them. They're going to try to blow up the mesh point. They're going to try to penetrate the line of scrimmage. So I'd say Belichick on defense calling plays and Jed Fish calling plays on offense are both very aggressive play callers, and Michigan hasn't seen that to date.
Yeah, I agree. They, Washington, they lose to Washington State. Okay, big rivalry game, 13 penalties. Last week against Rutgers, they had 8 penalties. They missed, 3 field goals.
Special teams was an issue.
They give Rutgers credit, but they were down in the red zone, 4 times and got a touchdown once. So the situations, Washington needs to clean up. If they clean those things up, it could have been a different game last week, and it will definitely be one this week. Michigan, they got to get ahead of Michigan, and they got to make Michigan throw the ball. And I know they don't want to. I know they didn't against USC, but that is the formula that they have to go into this game with. Get big plays. Wink Martindale's done a great job of adjusting to the college game. This one here, this will challenge him. I'll be curious to see, because I got a lot of respect for Wink. Is he going to pressure him? Is he going to cover him? Which is going to be approach going into this game with Washington?
I disagree about Michigan has to throw the ball. They can't throw the ball.
I know they probably can't. You think they just have to run it, though? Like, just run it down Washington's throat over and over?
First of all,
I don't think that's going to happen.
I think time of possession is no longer an important stat. It's an important stat in this game. You stop the clock with a bad pass game. You give Jed Fish the ball. He's going to move the ball. You want to give Jed Fish as few drives as possible. What I'm saying is you don't have to throw the ball to win. You've got to throw the ball. You've got to mix it up so they defend it a little bit. But they're not all of a sudden going to become a good passing team at this point.
That's not what he does.
Right. I would think that you would give him multiple formations, multiple option looks would be the way that I would try to slow down the Washington.
I just think I look at the records of these two teams. I don't think either record is really indicative. Washington is 3-2, and I know you could say this about a lot of teams. They're 2 plays away from being 5-0.
Absolutely.
It was a
self-inflicted.
Questionable 4th down call against Washington State and some special teams mistakes against Rutgers. Gained over 500 yards of offense in that game against a really good Scarlet Knight defense. I'm not sure that Michigan at 4-1 is necessarily indicative of who they are either. I just think there are still quarterback questions to answer for that team. Somebody's going to have to throw the ball at some point and beat a team with the pass play over the course of their last 7 games.
That's what I'm saying. They're going to. I mean, come on, what are we talking about? How you throw the ball to score points, you run it to win games. What happened?
So how many passes are we talking about? I mean,
I think they got to show 20 passes, 25 passes.
No way.
I don't think they throw 20 passes. I think, Jerry, my point is that you have to show me at least twice that you can have an explosive. Give me 2 15-plus yard passes to at least force Washington to cover that part of the field, especially if it's in the middle of the field.
You got to get them to back off. They're going to have a
safety
good
to drop down and don't put them in the box.
Yeah, we'll see. Tackling will be a key, obviously. We saw that in the USC game, Michigan. Tackling with Washington, they're working on that.
I mean, you can't argue with a guy that never coached in a defensive coordinator. What do you know about offense?
I'm just
only guy in history to have a 5th down play ready.
Yeah,
that's all I'm saying.
It was pretty special.
Here's the tail of the tape for Saturday's showdown in Lincoln between Rutgers and Nebraska. Something's got to give between 2 offenses averaging more than 30 per game and 2 defenses allowing fewer than 17 per contest. Both have solid turnover margins, though special teams has been an issue for the Huskers and one of the Scarlet Knights' strong points. Remember, Greg Schiano likes to run the special teams at Rutgers, a detail-oriented guy that clearly likes to have his finger in a little bit of everything that his team does. And right now, all his team is doing, Dave, is winning.
You know what? The worst job in America this past week, the special teams coach for Rutgers. You get a field goal blocked, okay, with Greg Schiano as the head coach, and that's where he spends all his time.
And their teams are good. They've always been good.
I could imagine. I wouldn't want to sit in that tape room. I would have had it been a treat. But no, Rutgers is good, and I think they're trying to be balanced. Callie McManus is not a drop-back passer, right? We know that, but he is. They're doing things with him. They're moving the pocket. Yep. They're throwing screens. They're taking a few shots. I think that they're doing a great job of trying to keep the offense balanced from where they went in the past. Obviously, with Monongai and Samuel, Samuel Brown. Those 2 guys are strong. So they're doing a good job of doing that, but you're going to have to win the situations of Greg Schiano. 3rd down, red zone, that's where he's going to get you if you are not focused as far as Nebraska.
Isn't it amazing, Jerry, how a quarterback can just seem so much more comfortable when he's with a coordinator who he is dialed in with? And clearly, Callie McManus and Kirk Shiraka have that kind of chemistry.
But let's back up for a second. Think about this. Rutgers, not too long ago, wasn't in the Big Ten. Greg Schiano takes over this program. He's going to Lincoln, Nebraska. That's won as many national championships as anybody. They have fired every coach at Nebraska since Tom Osborne. Every coach that they've hired to take Osborne's place has been fired. They, in a certain regard, they can't get out of their own way. And Rutgers is just the opposite. Did we think that there was going to come a time 10, 15 years ago when Nebraska was killing everybody, that Rutgers would go in there and it's a push? I mean, I think it's a matchup. I mean, I don't think.
I think most people would say it's a coin flip game.
I don't think Nebraska has any better talent than Rutgers. So let me repeat that. I don't think Nebraska has any more talent than Rutgers. How many years ago people?
It's a hard statement to believe.
And that's the job that Greg Schiano has done, and that's the job that Matt Rule has been handed. I mean, it's an incredible historic matchup in the strangest way.
And the self-inflicting things too that Nebraska has done. Last year it was the turnovers, right? Would they have the most in the country?
It's been a couple of years and losing the 1-score games.
This year, though, how about 4 of their 5 games they had 9 or more penalties? They've missed 5 field goals this year. I mean, those are the things that close the gap on some of these, that give you a chance to win some of these games. And that's what Matt Rule is going to have to do against a Schiano-type team, because Greg's going to bring it. I mean, hey, and the quarterback, he is coming along. For a young kid, he's getting better. Yeah. Right? But I'm telling you, he's going to have, in my opinion, they're going to see stuff this week, particularly on 3rd down, pressure-wise, Joe, that he hasn't seen. If
Rutgers could win 1st down, keeping Nebraska below 4 yards, 50%.
Rutgers defensively can win first down.
They get him behind the stakes on third down. Greg's going to pressure a young quarterback and see if he can handle it. So, and he has handled it, by the way.
Yes, Raiola has looked good.
He has handled pressure, but I think Greg wants to see it for himself.
Yep.
But I think Nebraska knows it's coming, right? They saw it against Illinois, especially in the fourth quarter.
Right.
Brett Bielema, Aaron Henry, they brought a lot of pressure in overtime, too. It finally got to Raiola in the overtime period, but I think he did certainly manage it fairly well, especially for a freshman.
Yeah, the biggest challenge, I'm telling you, having faced this defense, very similar, when Rich Rodriguez ran it at West Virginia and I was at Pitt, is going to be the blocking. Watch the offensive line for Rutgers, because this 3-3-5 defense, with the extra safeties coming down and the linebackers working off a stack position, it's not easy on an offensive line. You know that, Jerry. So, I mean, the communication and the schemes that they come up with to run the ball, it's going to be real interesting to me, because that Nebraska defense can make some plays. They'll make negative plays on you if you give them a chance.
Yeah,
no offensive lineman wants someone lining head up.
Right.
Just too many. They can do too many things. They're better athletes than we are, and we'd like you to shade so we can get some help from our neighbors and so on.
Our neighbors. Rutgers unbeaten, though preseason, excuse me, if you looked at Rutgers' schedule, I don't think it's that much of a shock that they're unbeaten. What is a surprise? The Hoosiers. For the first time since 1967, Indiana the focus of your Gatorade game leaders. Just the second time in program history that they could possibly be 6-0. Now, that 67 team opened with 6 straight wins, finished 9-2, went to the Rose Bowl, loss to USC. The 1910 squad you see on this list, they won 5 in a row before losing a 3-0 classic to Illinois at the old Jordan Field in Bloomington. You guys remember that one? That was a defensive struggle.
I missed that one, Coach.
3-0 some 114 years ago. We can talk all we want about Curt Cignetti's bravado. Folks out there, outside of the Big Ten, are still talking about what he said preseason. We've gotten past that, I think, because now we're watching Indiana. And, Jerry, we're just watching a football team that seems to get it. They're talented. They're fundamentally solid. They're not beating themselves. Even when they turned it over against Maryland, the defense comes on the field, doesn't give up any points after giving up the ball 4 different times. Both sides of the ball contributing here. Special teams, too. Yeah,
complete team, no doubt. And if you look at it, Northwestern's not playing very well. So is the team too confident? It's hard to say Indiana's going into a conference game being overconfident, right? The reason they won't is if you look at Cignetti's record, he's been here before. The players haven't been here before, but
a lot of them have because they were winning. Right,
that's true. That's true. But he's used to this, right? Because he's won everywhere he's gone. So he as a head coach, he has been in a situation where his team might get the big head. So he knows what it looks like, he knows what it smells like, and he addresses it because he's addressed it before.
Well, he said multiple times already this year, not demeaning the opponent, but we really haven't played a very hard schedule. Right. He's not saying that to us. He's saying that to his team through us to make sure they hear him.
Even when they beat UCLA in the Rose Bowl.
Yeah.
I think those turnovers were probably a positive for Sig. We used to always say when we would have those long runs of winning games like he's having, that sometimes you need a little bit of a crisis to get your team's attention, and particularly playing a Northwestern team, that they should beat, that they're better than. And those turnovers, that's going to give those guys something to get in that meeting room and say, here. Even though they overcame it, you're always looking for something like that to coach. And when they had those big leads, guys, they were playing their second team and their third team. The depth on this team, too, it's amazing that they just keep coming at you and aggressively. That's the thing that I always watch things from a defensive perspective, and I'm watching them play, and they had a 10-point, 15-point lead, and they're coming out play action, and that ball is going down the field.
And this is after Curtis Rourke throws not one but 2 bad interceptions in the first quarter.
They didn't back off.
They had an in-game interview with Curt Cignetti. He said, we're not going to change play calling. This guy's been here, done that. We have complete and total faith in him. As for Northwestern, they made a quarterback change a couple of weeks ago, going from Mike Wright to Jack Lausch. And it's a little bit like Michigan in the sense that Lausch is not really a guy that's going to test you downfield. And in a game like this, Indiana keeps pace. They're on pace scoring, about 45 points per game? It's hard to see a scenario where Northwestern's going to score enough points offensively to keep up with what Indiana can do.
Well, Washington is a talented defense. I watched the Northwestern offense against the Washington defense. I mean, Northwestern had no chance. I mean, they couldn't throw the ball. They couldn't run the ball. I'm still of the opinion that Mike Wright is the better quarterback for Northwestern. He can do more things. He's had experience at Vanderbilt. He's had experience at Mississippi State. The day we were at practice, I came away saying I think he's one of the better quarterbacks in the conference. But things went sideways at Duke, down on the goal line, and from that point on, I get a kick out of the fact that he threw one pick and almost threw two. I'm not sure that's an official stat when you almost throw something.
No, there's no INT,
right.
INT.
Because the protection wasn't right or the route wasn't right or so on. But I think they're really struggling on offense, obviously.
Yeah, I'm calling Cam Porter in this week, and I'm saying, Cam, get ready. You're going to get the ball 40 times.
He's healthy.
He's got to be healthy.
He's got to. I mean, and we got to run the ball this week, guys, somehow, some way. And we've said this probably 3 times so far in the show. You know, some of these teams, that might be their best offense and defense is to run the football and try to control the game a little bit. I think you're into the same scenario right here with Indiana.
And I'll say this again for the 100th time. There's 5 teams that have more talent than the rest of the conference. And the rest of the conference is so evenly matched that it's going to come down to coaching and quarterback play. And that's what this Northwestern Indiana game is.
And right now, Kurt Cignetti doing a good job. Curtis Rourke's one of the best quarterbacks in the Big Ten all year long. He's a hot ticket, by the way, right, Dave? Hot ticket in Evanston Saturday.
I found some, but we got. You know, it was an interesting. They talked about during the game. 14 of the 19 starters on this team, even though they might come from Miami of Ohio or they come
from James
Madison, all conference players. Yep. So they were given, you know, that Kirk Cignetti is bringing guys in here that are winners, that have won, regardless of the level of play. And you're seeing that, I think.
And I don't want to hear anymore like, oh, there are good players at James Madison. These guys are just good players. Like, Aiden Fisher's just a good, solid football player.
Right, and we've talked about this on Tailgate. You know, this hire by Scott at Indiana, you know, this opens up the door for more people like Cignetti, older guys that can bring players with them, and
give Scott Dolson some credit. Out of the box kind of hire for the Indiana AD, paying dividends so far. Hey, that piece.
Well, it was educating. I had no idea about those tablets and how quick, you know, the guys in the box get it. The timeout thing, I think, is good. I agree with Urban, and it's just not offense. I mean, you can use that timeout. An offense is moving down the field. They're using their timeouts. They're trying to get in position to kick a field goal. Well, guess what? You still have one in your back pocket. Now you call it, not to ice the kicker, but to call everybody over and make sure your block team is lined up exactly right in those little coaching points. So I like it. I'm all on board with that. And as far as the tablets, I called defenses in the press box for over 20 years. And, you know, the communication, I think, is the key. And, yes, knowing the next play and making adjustments, that's one part. But I think, you know, many times that I've seen something in the box and maybe a receiver ran an out and a takeoff or something, and I didn't see the out. And I'm yelling at the secondary coach, and the player comes off, and he's yelling at the player, "You should have been deep. Why did he get past you?" And then all of a sudden, 10 minutes later, I get the picture, and I'm looking. I'm saying, "Oh God,
hey, you can look at it.
Hey, tell him he was right." Yeah. And now, you know, just all that lack of communication or wasted time, I think, makes a huge difference.
I just think we're at a time where these are the brightest, most involved student athletes in all time, in all sports.
And they're all technologically so savvy.
And for the people that don't like maybe some of the changes that they see, there's more players playing with degrees in college football than ever before in the history of the game. So this is just one more really good change for our young people. Remember, you know, I've got 2 grandchildren. They have tablets in grade school. I mean, so these players are so literate with these things. It's crazy.
They're handed out by the school.
Well,
Mom and Dad aren't buying them. Like, the school is actually giving these students
and when we
technology.
when you guys do player interviews, what's your hobbies? They may say, "Oh, cooking and playing video games," right? Everybody's into this type of technology, and that's about what they're doing.
To your point about grad students, we had Big Ten basketball media days on Thursday. I'd say about 50% of the student athletes that were there representing their schools already graduated.
Right.
Yeah.
That is the day and age we live in today in college sports. In the television industry, this is what we call a hype VO.
Really?
Yeah, kind of a voiceover getting you ready for UCLA, Penn State, getting you psyched for
Let's
the
do it.
Lions to
Let's
come
do
across
it.
country in
Absolutely.
battle against the unbeaten Penn State Nittany Lions. James Franklin's team has looked really good. I mean, defensively, they are absolute game wreckers. Saw that against Illinois. 13 tackles for loss in that game. You saw Abdul Carter right there, National Player of the Week. He had 4 TFLs, couple of sacks, a forced fumble. Right now, UCLA is really struggling, Jerry. We don't even know about the availability of Ethan Garbers. He's been banged up. This just seems like a really tough matchup for the Bruins.
Well, I mean, think about how this particular program started under Coach Foster. You know, Chip Kelly leaves later than obviously ordinary. Coach Foster hasn't been a head coach before. He's got 2 new coordinators. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts. What I see on film, on video, is that this team's getting better. But, you know, their schedule is just brutal.
The start of it, wow.
Yeah.
Three top 20 teams, right?
Yeah, and so this isn't going to be an easy day tomorrow. But, again, if you're watching video and you can say to your team, hey, look, this is better than it was last week, and, you know, it's going to happen. We're going to get some wins here. That's coaching. That's what you have to do.
But you're also looking at the Penn State defense and seeing what they've been doing lately, and that has been really impressive.
Yeah, and you know, they're not doing quite as much blitzing as they did in the past. I mean, Tom Allen's done a great job. You know, I was real curious. This ex-head coach, right? You know, with a different personality, obviously, than Manny Diaz, who left and went to Duke. You know, you go up there and you take over one of the top defenses in the league. How are the players? How's everything going to work? You know, and then what are you going to tweak, and what changes you're going to make? I'll tell you, A+. I mean, so far, I mean, everybody's on the same page and making plays.
I want to say Tom Allen, if I remember this right, what James told us when we were on campus, I think he spent 2 weeks at Penn State talking about the job, talking about how what he wanted to do isn't much different than Manny, learning Manny's defense. I mean, again, this is an ex-head coach. He doesn't need the money. I mean,
could have taken a year off.
Could have taken a year off, and
instead shutting down opposing offenses everywhere.
I'll say this: James got both coordinators right. I mean,
quickly,
this is a good coordinator.
And he got an offensive line that I wish that's playing like I haven't seen a Penn State offensive line.
About a minute left. Purdue, Wisconsin. We've had a lot of conversations about Wisconsin having an identity. You believe they do. Others are wondering what this offense will look like. Again, against a Purdue team right now, really struggling to find their way.
Yeah, I'll start with Purdue. I mean, this is a team in crisis. First-time head coach. It's his second year. He's fired his offensive coordinator. He's had over 100 yards and penalties in 2 of his games. Yeah. What I would suggest is you coordinate the defense, you approve the offensive game plan, and you meet with every player on the team individually and tell them what we're going to do, and you better still be on board.
Yeah, you got a quarterback in Hudson Card that can play, right? I mean, he's got ability. He's strong. After the first game, I don't know what's happened there. He fires the coordinator. But, hey, you got to give this kid a chance to win a game for you, in my opinion. We'll see if it happens.
Purdue and Wisconsin starts our Saturday tripleheader right here on the Big Ten Network. That is a noon Eastern, 11 local kick in Madtown. Then we'll have Indiana Northwestern. Hot ticket, Dave says, mid-afternoon window, USC, Minnesota at night. For Dave Wanstead and Jerry Girardo, I'm Rick Pizzo. Thanks for the hang on Big Ten today. Have a great weekend. See you Saturday morning.